Tiniola's mornings were quiet in a way that only people who had survived loud pain could appreciate. She left her apartment before the city fully woke, walking with purpose but never rushing, as if haste might invite trouble. At Meridian Solutions, she was known for reliability rather than noise. She met deadlines, corrected errors without blame, and carried herself with a calm that made some people mistake her for weak. They didn't know how deliberate her silence was. Lagos rewarded confidence, but it punished desperation, and Tiniola had learned that dignity was often the strongest armor. She dressed neatly, spoke clearly, and never overshared. Her co-workers respected her work, but respect in offices was fragile. It bent easily toward power. 2 years earlier, power had turned against her in a far more intimate way. When she lost her job due to downsizing, she thought the worst part would be starting again. She was wrong. Kola, her husband then, reacted not with concern but calculation. He spoke about standards, about how a man like him could not be married to uncertainty. He reduced her fear to inconvenience, and her struggle to embarrassment. The marriage ended quickly, cleanly on paper, but painfully in her chest. Tiniola left with her pride intact and her heart bruised, determined never to beg for relevance again. She rebuilt herself piece by piece, new skills, new habits, new strength that didn't need applause. What no one at Meridian Solutions knew was that Tiniola was no longer alone. She had remarried quietly, intentionally keeping her private life sacred. Adebayo Cole had entered her life gently, not as a rescuer, but as a partner. He listened more than he spoke and never measured her worth by her productivity. She didn't marry him because of what he owned. She married him because he respected her when she felt smallest. That privacy was why, when an email announcing a new strategic partner arrived in everyone's inbox, Tiniola opened it without suspicion, unaware that the past she had survived was about to walk back into her life wearing authority. The conference room buzzed with anticipation as executives gathered for the introduction. The air was thick with ambition and polite smiles, the kind people practiced when money was in the room. When the door opened and the man stepped in, the room stood instinctively. The HR manager announced his name with pride, Kola Adeyemi, strategic partner. The sound of it froze Tiniola where she sat. Her fingers tightened around her pen as recognition struck. She lifted her eyes slowly, and there he was, older, sharper, dressed in confidence that had been polished by success. Kola's gaze swept the room until it landed on her. Recognition flickered, then settled into something darker, satisfaction. His smile was subtle but unmistakable, like a man who had just discovered an advantage. He spoke eloquently about growth, discipline, and standards, the same words he once used to justify walking away from her marriage. The room applauded him generously. Tiniola sat still, her face carefully neutral, refusing to give him the reaction he was silently demanding. She reminded herself that survival had already taught her endurance. This was just another test. After the meeting, Kola approached her with calculated ease. He greeted her like an old acquaintance, his tone smooth, his words edged. He asked personal questions disguised as politeness and made a casual remark about her, still finding her footing. The insult was gentle enough to deny, but sharp enough to sting. When he walked away, an email followed almost immediately, demanding reports on an impossible timeline. Tiniola stared at her screen, steadying her breath. She understood then that this reunion was not accidental. Kola hadn't just returned. He had come prepared to dominate. Kola settled into Meridian Solutions, as if the space belonged to him. Meetings bent around his schedule, and executives deferred to his opinions, even when they conflicted with established plans. He spoke with authority and corrected people publicly, presenting cruelty as mentorship. Tiniola noticed how quickly admiration replaced caution. Power, she realized again, was magnetic even when it bruised. Kola enjoyed his position visibly, especially when his eyes found her across a room, lingering just long enough to remind her that he believed control was still his. During a project briefing, Tiniola presented her work with precision. Her data was sound, her conclusions reasonable, but Kola interrupted her repeatedly, questioning her methods in front of senior staff. He framed his criticism as concern for excellence, but his tone carried contempt. Laughter followed his remarks, not malicious, but complicit. The silence of the room weighed heavier than his words. Tiniola finished her presentation without raising her voice or lowering her eyes. Inside, she felt the familiar tightening that came when someone tried to shrink her presence. That evening, at home, she told Adebayo everything. Not dramatically, not angrily, just fact by fact. Adebayo listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he didn't promise confrontation. He didn't suggest she quit. He simply told her she was not imagining the pattern, and that she would not face it alone. Tiniola slept uneasily that night, knowing the line between past and present had blurred, and that Kola intended to redraw it in his favor. The humiliation came during a departmental review. Tiniola stood confidently, explaining progress and challenges, when Kola cut in sharply. He questioned her competence openly, dismissing her strategy with a smile that invited the room to agree. He used her name repeatedly, emphasizing it like a flaw, and suggested she lacked the capacity for senior-level thinking. The laughter that followed was brief but damaging. No one intervened. Authority had spoken, and authority was rarely challenged. Tiniola felt the weight of every eye in the room, but she did not crumble. She completed her report calmly, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. The meeting moved on as if nothing significant had happened, but something had shifted. Kola had crossed from subtle intimidation into deliberate humiliation. It was no longer about performance, it was personal. He wanted her diminished, publicly. Later, alone in the restroom, Tiniola steadied herself. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She simply breathed until her pulse slowed. That night, she told Adebayo exactly what happened. He listened, then assured her that dignity did not require silence forever, only patience. Tiniola nodded, unaware that the quiet she was maintaining was already building toward a moment Kola could not control. By the end of the week, Kola's actions became systematic. Emails questioning her work were copied to senior management. Deadlines tightened without warning. Minor errors were magnified into character flaws. The office atmosphere shifted around Tiniola as colleagues grew cautious, distancing themselves out of fear or convenience. She recognized the tactic clearly now. Isolate the target, rewrite the narrative, then justify removal. Kola was not improvising. He was executing something familiar. Tiniola observed carefully, documenting everything quietly. She did not confront him, nor did she complain to HR, knowing how easily truth could be twisted when power controlled the microphone. Instead, she focused on maintaining excellence, refusing to give him the mistake he wanted. Every insult reinforced her understanding that this was not about her capability, but about his need to dominate someone who had once walked away from him intact. That night, sitting beside Adebayo on their balcony, she spoke with calm clarity. She didn't ask him to intervene immediately. She told him she wanted Kola exposed, not embarrassed, but revealed. Adebayo listened, then nodded slowly. He told her that timing mattered, and consequences carried more weight when delivered quietly. As the city lights flickered below them, Tiniola felt something settle inside her. Kola believed he had chosen an easy target. He had no idea he was standing at the beginning of his own undoing. Tiniola learned to carry pain the way Lagos women carried water on their heads, steady, silent, refusing to spill in public. But that weekend, the silence in her home felt heavier than usual, like it had teeth. Adebayo was home earlier than normal, not because she begged him to be, but because he noticed the small things. The way she removed her shoes without her usual sigh of relief, the way she stared at the TV without hearing it, the way her phone kept lighting up with work emails she didn't want to open. He didn't press. He just made tea, set it in front of her, and sat close enough to be present without being invasive. Tiniola wanted to pretend everything was fine, because she had practiced fine for years. She wanted to say, it's just office stress, and end the conversation there. But Adebayo's quiet patience made it difficult to lie. Finally, she spoke, not with tears, not with drama, but with the careful tone of someone narrating a painful report. She told him Cola was the strategic partner. She told him Cola's smile had returned like a debt collector. She told him the way Cola corrected her in meetings felt like a replay of their marriage. Adebayo listened with his hands clasped, eyes steady, jaw tightening only once when she described the laughter in the conference room. He didn't interrupt to promise thunder. He waited for the whole truth because he respected her enough to let her finish. When she ended, the room stayed still. Even the ceiling fan sounded too loud. Adebayo asked one question, simple but sharp. What do you want to do? Tiniola blinked, surprised. Most people asked what they could do for her, as if she was helpless. Adebayo asked what she wanted, as if her choices still mattered. She swallowed and admitted the honest conflict in her chest. She wanted to run, and she wanted to stay. She wanted peace, and she wanted dignity. She wanted to be protected, and she wanted to prove to herself that she wasn't the woman Cola could break. I don't want to be the office gist, she said softly. I don't want him to say, I'm using my husband's power to fight my battles. Adebayo nodded slowly, understanding without arguing. Then we won't do anything that makes you look like a headline, he said. But we also won't allow a pattern of humiliation to become your new normal. He asked if she was documenting the emails and meeting notes. She said yes. He asked if she had witnesses. She hesitated, then mentioned Saad, quiet support, not brave enough to speak publicly yet. Adebayo didn't blame anyone. He simply advised Tiniola to keep her records clean, factual, and dated. No emotional messages, no heated replies. Let your excellence be loud, he said, and let his behavior be the thing that speaks against him. That night, Tiniola lay beside Adebayo, listening to his breathing and fighting the old fear that always returned when Cola appeared in her life, the fear that her efforts would never be enough to silence someone determined to rewrite her story. She remembered how Cola used to accuse her of being too proud whenever she refused to beg. Pride, to him, meant boundaries. She also remembered what she hadn't told Adebayo yet. That part of her still carried shame from the divorce, not because she had failed, but because society loved blaming women for men's cruelty. Adebayo turned slightly in bed and asked, Are you afraid? It wasn't a trap. It was a door. Tiniola stared at the ceiling for a moment, then answered honestly, I'm afraid that no matter what I do, he'll keep finding ways to punish me for leaving him. Adebayo's voice stayed calm. Then we won't fight him with noise, he replied. We'll fight him with structure. He explained gently that some men only understood consequences when consequences came through systems they respected, boards, contracts, reputations, records. Your dignity is not something you negotiate, he told her. And you don't have to suffer privately to prove you're strong. Tiniola closed her eyes, not fully comforted but steadier, like someone who had finally found a handrail on a dark staircase. She didn't ask what he planned. She simply whispered, I want to handle it right. And Adebayo answered, we will. Monday began like an ambush disguised as routine. Tiniola arrived early, determined to stay ahead of whatever Cola tried next, only to find her calendar already hijacked. 3 meetings back-to-back, all labeled urgent, all requested by Cola. The first meeting wasn't even about strategy, it was about control. Cola walked in late, greeted everyone like a king for giving his subjects, and then opened with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We need to tighten performance, he said, looking directly at Tiniola. Some people are getting too comfortable. He assigned tasks with impossible turnaround times, then spoke as if the deadlines were generosity. He asked Tiniola questions he knew would require complex answers, but framed them like simple common sense, creating the illusion that her competence was questionable. Every time she answered clearly, he shifted the goalpost. If she stayed calm, he said she lacked passion. If she defended her work, he said she was emotional. He wasn't managing a project, he was managing a narrative. And the office, hungry for his approval, treated his cruelty like culture. As days passed, the pressure spread beyond meetings into the small humiliations that were easier to deny. Cola began copying senior managers on emails that questioned her professionalism. Please confirm why this wasn't sent earlier. He would request documents at midnight, then follow up at 6 a.m. with still waiting. He would praise other staff publicly for work Tiniola had actually coordinated, then act surprised when she didn't look grateful. He stopped calling her by her title and started calling her Tenny, casual in a way that stripped her authority. When she corrected him politely, "It's Ms. Adebayo at work, sir," he laughed and said, "Oh, so you've upgraded." The words sounded light, but they landed heavy. Co-workers chuckled uncertainly, the way people laugh when they fear becoming the next target. Saad pulled her aside once and whispered, "He's provoking you. Please don't react." Tiniola nodded, but inside she felt the cost of restraint. Each day she stayed composed, Kola escalated, as if calmness insulted him more than tears ever could. By Thursday, HR requested a friendly check-in with Tiniola, which she immediately recognized as a trap dressed in politeness. They asked vague questions about her wellness, her comfort, her ability to handle high expectations. The language was soft, but the implication was cruel. If she complained, she might be labeled unstable. If she stayed silent, the pattern would continue. Tiniola chose precision. She mentioned workload changes, unreasonable timelines, and inappropriate commentary, without drama, without accusations, just facts. HR smiled too much and promised to monitor the situation. She left that meeting with a clear understanding that no one was coming to rescue her out of kindness. If the situation changed, it would be because evidence forced it. That evening, she updated her folder. Screenshots, timestamps, meeting notes, witness names. She didn't do it like a bitter ex-wife plotting revenge. She did it like a professional protecting her career. At home, she told Adebayo, "He's trying to make me look like the problem." Adebayo nodded and replied, "Then we'll make sure the truth has receipts." And for the first time since Kola returned, Tiniola felt something new beneath the fear, control. Kola thought he knew Tiniola because he once signed papers that ended her first marriage. He thought the divorce gave him the final definition of who she was, a woman who failed, a woman who needed him, a woman he could shame whenever he wanted to feel tall. But Tiniola's life after Kola was not a waiting room. It was a workshop. She rebuilt herself in small, stubborn ways that didn't make noise. She took online courses after work, listening to lectures with her earphones while neighbors argued over generator fuel. She attended weekend seminars where people spoke about career growth as if confidence could be purchased, and she went anyway, writing notes like a student hungry for a future. She practiced speaking with authority, not arrogance. She learned how to present data so clearly that it could stand in court. She learned how to dress professionally even when her budget begged for mercy. Most importantly, she learned that survival was not the same as living, and she promised herself she would not spend her life pleading to be respected. It was during one of those seasons, tired but determined, that she met Adebayo. Not at a party, not at a flashy event, not at some unrealistic destiny location. Just an office lobby on a rainy afternoon, when she was waiting for an interview, and the rain had made everyone irritated. Her file folder got wet at the edges, and she was trying not to panic when Adebayo offered her a clean handkerchief and a bottle of water. He didn't flirt. He didn't ask for her number like a man collecting contacts. He simply said, "You look like someone fighting a hard day. Breathe." That sentence, simple as it was, stunned her, because it wasn't advice, it was permission. They spoke briefly about work, about Lagos traffic, about how people treated the unemployed like criminals. When she learned he was also in business, she assumed he was just another ambitious man. She didn't know he owned the building they were standing in. He didn't tell her. He didn't use it as bait. He asked about her goals instead, like her dreams mattered more than his status. Their relationship grew slowly and quietly. Adebayo didn't try to fix her with money. He supported her with consistency. When she got a new job, he celebrated her effort, not the salary. When she doubted herself, he reminded her of her competence without shouting motivational quotes. When she told him about Kola, she expected judgment or pity. Instead, Adebayo asked, "What did you learn from that marriage that you refused to repeat?" That question changed her. It made her see her story as growth, not shame. They married without noise, without social media announcements, without dramatic displays. Tiniola kept her ring off at work by choice, not to hide Adebayo, but to protect her peace from office eyes. Kola would have assumed that meant she was still alone, still vulnerable, still craving validation. He had no idea the woman he was tormenting had already become someone new, disciplined, loved properly, and prepared to stand her ground. And if Kola was still playing old games, he was about to discover the board had changed. It started as whispers in the pantry and grew into full conversations in the corridors. Meridian Solutions might be acquired, or at least funded, by a serious investor. Nobody knew who, which made the rumor even sweeter. In Lagos offices, mystery was entertainment. People speculated wildly: foreign investors, oil money, tech billionaires, private equity. The CEO began wearing his best suits again, as if fabric could attract wealth. Directors started speaking in polished tones, dropping phrases like valuation and stakeholding, as if they had always lived inside boardrooms. Even the cleaners noticed the energy shift. More meetings, more visitors, more fear dressed as excitement. Kola, naturally, behaved as if the rumor existed because of him. He began hinting in meetings that he had relationships and influence, and that Meridian Solutions should be grateful he was steering their future. He was building a story where he was the gatekeeper of opportunity. And because people wanted the rumor to be true, they wanted him to be the hero of it. For Tiniola, the rumor created two realities at once. On one hand, it made the office more cautious because senior management didn't want scandal on the eve of potential investment. On the other hand, it made Kola more dangerous because he sensed a climax approaching and wanted to crush her before it arrived. He began to demand that she present more frequently, knowing presentations were his favorite stage. He requested performance reviews and asked for feedback from her coworkers in ways that felt like interrogation. Still, Tiniola stayed steady. She kept her records. She avoided emotional responses. She focused on delivering work, so clean it could not be dismissed honestly. Saad warned her one afternoon, "He's trying to set you up so that when the investor comes, he can recommend you be removed." Tiniola nodded, understanding. If Kola controlled the narrative before the investor arrived, he could present her as the weak link and himself as the savior who corrected it. That weekend, Adebayo asked a careful question while they ate dinner. "Has anyone mentioned an investor visit date?" Tiniola froze for a second. "Why?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. Adebayo's eyes stayed calm. "Because the office is behaving like something big is coming," he replied. Tiniola hesitated, then told him what she knew, nothing certain, only rumors, only anxious executives, only Kola acting like a man preparing a final blow. Adebayo nodded slowly, as if confirming something internally. He didn't reveal anything dramatic. He didn't say, "It's me." He simply said, "Continue doing exactly what you're doing. Keep your work clean. Keep your records complete. Don't react to bait." Tiniola studied him, trying to read between his words. Adebayo wasn't a loud man, but in that moment his quiet felt like controlled power. She realized then that while her office chased rumors like entertainment, Adebayo moved in realities like strategy. And whatever was coming, it was not going to be a random twist. It was going to be timed. The final insult came on a day when Tiniola almost believed things might calm down. The office was unusually polished, chairs aligned, reception smiling too brightly, executives moving with rehearsed urgency. A new calendar invite popped up, leadership alignment. Meeting, strategic direction. Kola would be there. Senior management would be there. HR would be there. The kind of meeting where reputations were shaped quietly. Tiniola walked in prepared, files organized, mind steady. She told herself, "Say less. Present facts. Let your work speak." At first, the meeting sounded normal: performance, targets, next quarter planning. Then Kola leaned forward, clasped his hands, and said with false seriousness, "We need to talk about weak links." The room stilled. Tiniola felt the air change. Kola continued, eyes fixed on her. "Some people here confuse effort with competence. And we're approaching a phase where we can't afford sentimental staffing. The word sentimental was poison. It suggested she was being kept out of pity, not value. He turned to the CEO and asked, "Do we have a plan to restructure certain roles, especially where performance has been inconsistent?" Tiniola's chest tightened, but she remained calm. The CEO hesitated, glancing at HR like a man searching for the safest answer. Cola pressed on smoothly, like he had rehearsed this. "I'm saying this for the good of the company," he added, voice gentle, weapon hidden. "We have standards. And if a certain team lead cannot meet them, we should be honest. Especially with a potential investor watching." The meeting wasn't about strategy anymore, it was about her. Tiniola opened her folder and spoke clearly, presenting evidence of her team's results. Improved turnaround time, reduced errors, increased client satisfaction. She spoke with calm authority, refusing to beg. Cola smiled and said, "Numbers can be arranged," as if her work was inherently dishonest. Then he dropped the line that landed like a slap. "Let's not pretend. Everyone here knows she has a history of instability. I mean, look at her personal life record." The room went silent because everyone understood what he meant. Divorce. Shame. A label he wanted to pin on her forever. Tiniola stared at him for a moment, and something in her settled into clarity, so sharp it felt peaceful. She didn't argue. She didn't explode. She simply said, "My personal life is not a performance metric." Her voice was steady enough to make the silence louder. Cola shrugged like she was boring him. "I'm just saying," he replied. "Some people bring unnecessary complications to serious environments." HR shifted uncomfortably. The CEO cleared his throat. Nobody defended her. Not because they believed Cola, but because power made cowards of decent people. Tiniola gathered her papers calmly when the meeting ended, her hands not shaking, her face composed. She walked out without rushing, as if the insult had not touched her. But inside, she felt a boundary form, final, unmovable. That evening, she got home and met Adebayo's eyes. She didn't cry. She didn't rant. She just said, "He crossed the line today." Adebayo nodded once, as if he had been waiting for that exact sentence. "What did he do?" he asked. Tiniola told him everything, especially the part about Cola dragging her personal life into a professional room. Adebayo's expression didn't change dramatically, but the air around him shifted, like a door closing gently but permanently. He stood, picked up his phone, and said, "Tomorrow, I'm coming to your office." Tiniola's heart jumped. "Adebayo," he raised a hand softly, not to silence her, but to reassure her. "Not to cause drama," he said. "To end disrespect." And in that moment, Tiniola realized the rumor in the office wasn't just a rumor. Something was truly coming. And for the first time since Cola returned, she wasn't afraid of what the next day would bring. That night, after Tiniola's sentence, "He crossed the line today," settled in the room like a final stamp. Adebayo didn't pace or raise his voice. He didn't start naming enemies like a man searching for a fight. He simply asked her to sit, ate 2 quiet spoonfuls of the soup she had warmed, and then placed his phone beside his plate as if it had weight. Tiniola watched him the way you watch someone you love when you sense a storm behind their calm. He repeated her words back to her slowly, not for drama, but for clarity. Cola had attacked her competence, then reached into her private life in front of management. Adebayo nodded once, eyes steady, and said something that made her chest tighten with mixed relief and fear. "Tomorrow isn't about proving anything. It's about closing a door he keeps trying to enter." Tiniola tried to argue softly about office politics, about gossip, about how people might accuse her of using her husband's influence. But Adebayo's calm didn't break. "If people want to talk, they will talk," he replied. "But respect must be non-negotiable. And what Cola is doing is not leadership. It's intimidation." Adebayo made the phone call after she went to shower, not because he wanted secrecy, but because he wanted her to rest without carrying the burden of his strategy. When she returned, she found him seated with his laptop open, not typing frantically, but reading, quietly studying documents the way some men study opponents. He asked for her company's meeting schedule for the next day, the names of the key executives, the time the rumored investor was expected, and the names of anyone who had been present during the humiliations. Tiniola hesitated when he asked for witnesses, because she knew fear made people unreliable, but Adebayo didn't push. Even if they don't speak, he said, records do. He asked her to forward the copied emails and to write a short timeline, dates, meetings, quotes she remembered, who was present, nothing emotional, just facts. Tiniola complied, her fingers moving slowly as she organized everything. It felt strange, like she was preparing a case file on a part of her life she wished didn't exist. Still, as she compiled the evidence, a steadiness returned to her. Kola had been confident because he believed there would be no consequence. Adebayo was building consequence without noise. Before bed, Adebayo finally told her, "Tomorrow, I'll be at Meridian." He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like a schedule. Tiniola's heartbeat jumped. "As what?" she asked, even though a part of her already knew the answer was bigger than she was ready to hear. Adebayo looked at her for a long moment and chose his words carefully. "As someone with a right to be there," he said. "And as your husband." She opened her mouth to protest again, but he reached for her hand and squeezed gently. "You've been strong," he said. "But strength does not mean enduring disrespect forever." Tiniola stared at him, then nodded slowly, because she understood something new. Adebayo wasn't coming to shout Kola down. He was coming to end the game entirely. And that kind of ending didn't need a raised voice, only timing. Meridian Solutions looked like a different place the next morning. Even the security men stood straighter, as if they had received invisible instructions to behave like a company that mattered. The reception area smelled freshly cleaned. The glass door shone, and staff wore their best professional face, the one that hid panic under politeness. Rumors ran faster than emails. The investor was arriving today, and the CEO wanted everything perfect, no drama, no conflict, no embarrassment. Tiniola entered quietly, greeting the receptionist with her usual courtesy. Her stomach was tight, not because she feared Kola's words anymore, but because she could feel the day pulling towards something inevitable. Kola arrived an hour later, moving through the lobby like someone who believed the whole building was lucky to host him. He greeted executives with confidence, then glanced at Tiniola with a smirk that promised another performance. "Big day," he said lightly, as if he was speaking to an assistant, not a professional. "Try not to complicate it." Tiniola didn't respond. She simply walked to her desk and opened her laptop, choosing silence not as weakness, but as discipline. By mid-morning, everyone was gathered for the investor welcome session. Executives in front, managers behind, junior staff positioned like background decor. The CEO kept checking his watch, smiling too widely, whispering to HR and the directors. Kola looked relaxed, like a man attending an event he believed he owned. Tiniola stood near the side with her team, face neutral, heart steadying itself. Then the elevator doors opened. A man stepped out, and the room changed instantly, not because he demanded attention, but because the air seemed to recognize authority. Adebayo walked in with quiet confidence, dressed simply but expensively, the kind of man whose calm was louder than other people's noise. Behind him were two associates and a driver who stayed a respectful distance. The CEO's face transformed into surprise and urgent excitement, as if he had just realized the rumor was not only true, it was bigger than he had imagined. "Mr. Cole," the CEO said, stepping forward quickly, hand extended. "We're honored, truly honored." Staff exchanged stunned glances. Some whispered the name like a prayer. Cola's smile froze at the edges, his eyes narrowing, because he sensed something he hadn't planned for. Adebayo shook the CEO's hand politely, but his gaze moved past the executives, past the rehearsed smiles, until it found Tiniola. In that moment, his face softened, not dramatically, not weakly, just enough to show the room that this was personal, even if he kept it professional. Tiniola's breath caught. She hadn't told anyone at work who her husband was, and now she watched realization bloom around the room like wildfire. Kola took one step forward, then stopped, as if the floor had shifted under him. The CEO began to speak about partnerships and valuations, but the words sounded distant, because everyone's attention was now trapped in the quiet gravity between Adebayo and Tiniola. Adebayo didn't rush. He didn't perform. He walked forward calmly, as if the path had always been his, and the entire room parted without being asked. Tiniola felt every eye on her, but for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel exposed, she felt protected. Adebayo's steps were measured, deliberate, the kind that made people instinctively move aside. He didn't look left and right to acknowledge admiration. He didn't greet the directors, who were practically vibrating with anxiety and excitement. He walked straight to Tiniola, like she was the reason the building existed. When he stopped in front of her, the room became so quiet that even the hum of the air conditioner felt rude. "Tenny," he said softly, with the warmth of home in his voice. "Good morning." Tiniola's throat tightened. She managed a calm smile, the kind she wore when she refused to be shaken. "Good morning," she replied. She didn't step back. She didn't bow. She stood like a woman who belonged exactly where she was. Adebayo's gaze flicked briefly over her face, as if checking for bruises you couldn't see. Then he turned slightly to address the executives, still without raising his voice. "Thank you for the invitation," he said. "Before we proceed, I'd like to make something clear. My wife works here." Gasps and murmurs moved through the room, like wind through dry leaves. The CEO's mouth opened, then closed again, because he suddenly understood the weight of what was happening. HR went stiff. Managers exchanged panicked looks, and several people's eyes snapped toward Kola, without even trying to hide it. Kola's face held a forced calm, but his jaw tightened, his eyes darting, calculating, searching for a way to regain control. Adebayo continued evenly. "My wife is Tiniola Adebayo." The name landed like a gavel. Tiniola felt the room tilt. Co-workers who had avoided her suddenly looked ashamed. Others looked curious, like they wanted to rewind the last few weeks and watch it again with new understanding. Kola's nostrils flared slightly. He tried to smile, but it came out strained. "Mr. Cole," he began, stepping forward, voice smooth with desperation, disguised as confidence. "This is a surprise." "I didn't realize." Adebayo raised one hand, not aggressively, just firmly, and Kola's words died mid-air. That simple gesture did what weeks of office politics couldn't. It silenced Kola. Adebayo's tone remained calm, but it carried a quiet authority that made the room feel smaller. "I'm here today in a professional capacity," he said, "but I won't pretend personal conduct doesn't affect professional environments." He looked around the room, pausing just enough for everyone to feel included in the responsibility. A workplace that allows intimidation, humiliation, or personal attacks is not aligned with the kind of partnership I invest in. Tiniola didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply stood beside him, breathing evenly, letting the truth be said without begging for it. In that moment, she realized the biggest difference between Kola and Adebayo. Kola needed an audience to feel powerful. Adebayo didn't. Kola had tried to turn her into a warning. Adebayo had turned her into a fact the room could no longer ignore. The executives attempted to recover the moment with nervous professionalism. The CEO began to speak about company values and zero tolerance, but his words sounded like someone reading a script too late. Adebayo listened politely, then responded with controlled clarity. He didn't insult anyone. He didn't threaten lawsuits. He didn't raise his voice. He simply asked for a private briefing, 10 minutes, with the CEO, HR head, and Kola present. The request itself carried authority. It wasn't a suggestion. They moved into a smaller meeting room, glass walls exposing silhouettes like a stage. Tiniola was asked to join, and as she walked in, she felt a strange reversal. The same people who had watched her be humiliated now watched her enter with dignity intact. Kola sat rigidly, arms crossed, face tight with contained panic. He tried to speak first, throwing out smooth sentences about misunderstandings and high standards. Adebayo let him finish, then asked calmly, "Do your standards include referencing a woman's divorce as a professional weakness?" The question hung there, clean and sharp. Kola's eyes flickered. He attempted a laugh. "That wasn't what I meant," he said quickly. You know how meetings get. Adebayo didn't react emotionally. He simply slid a document across the table. It wasn't a dramatic file dump. It was organized evidence. Copied emails, timestamps, meeting notes, patterns. The kind of record that didn't need shouting to be believed. Adebayo spoke quietly, pointing to specific entries. This email, he said, copied senior management unnecessarily, questioning her professionalism. He turned a page. This comment in a meeting, witnessed by these staff members. He turned another. This attempt to isolate her role ahead of an investor visit. The CEO's face tightened as he read, because the situation was no longer gossip, it was documented risk. HR looked uncomfortable, but not surprised, which revealed its own guilt. Cola's confidence began to leak. This is personal, he said, voice rising slightly. This is about your wife's bitterness. She's framing me because Adebayo cut him off without raising his voice. It's not personal, he said. It's conduct. And conduct has consequences. Then he looked at the CEO. My firm will not proceed with any partnership under these conditions, he said. Effective immediately, we withdraw. The CEO's eyes widened. Mr. Cole, please. Adebayo lifted a hand gently. I won't argue, he said. I'm informing you. Adebayo's next words were calm, but devastating in implication. He explained that his firm would proceed with a competing acquisition in the same sector, meaning Meridian's market advantage, tied to Cola's promised connections, would be weakened overnight. He wasn't destroying anyone illegally. He was simply moving resources where integrity matched value. He stood, signaling the meeting's end. You have a choice, he told the CEO evenly. Correct the environment or accept the cost of enabling it. Then he turned to Cola for the first time with directness that felt like a door slamming. You don't get to humiliate someone and then hide behind strategy, Adebayo said. Not in my presence. Cola's mouth opened as if to respond, but no words came. For the first time, the room saw Cola not as a powerful partner, but as a man exposed, small, desperate, and suddenly aware that his favorite weapon, public humiliation, could no longer work. The shift didn't happen slowly. It happened like a light switching on, revealing what had been in the room all along. After Adebayo left the private meeting, executives moved differently, less confident, more cautious, as if they had discovered the building was standing on thin glass. The CEO called an emergency session with HR and senior management, and Cola was asked to wait outside. That alone was a humiliation Cola wasn't used to. Being excluded from the room where decisions were made. Staff watched from their desks, pretending to work while absorbing the new reality. The whispers began again, but now they were different. Instead of Cola is powerful, it became Cola has messed up. People who had laughed at his jokes suddenly remembered they had deadlines. People who had avoided Tiniola now greeted her with awkward kindness. Tiniola noticed it all, but she didn't enjoy it. Pity and fear were not the respect she wanted. She wanted professionalism. She wanted dignity. She wanted an environment where her work spoke louder than anyone's mouth. Cola tried to regain control with charm. He cornered the CEO briefly, speaking fast, smiling too much, promising damage control. He approached HR with false innocence. This is being exaggerated. He even tried to speak to Tiniola privately, his voice dropping into a tone that attempted familiarity, as if he could rewind the last weeks by sounding gentle. Tenny, you didn't have to do this, he said, eyes tight. You could have spoken to me. You're trying to ruin me. Tiniola looked at him calmly and said the simplest truth. You were already doing this to yourself. Her calm irritated him more than anger would have. He hissed, so you married money, and now you think you're untouchable. Tiniola didn't flinch. I married peace, she replied quietly. And you tried to disturb it at work. Cola's face twisted, but before he could respond, a director called him into the boardroom, not to honor him, but to question him. The tone had changed. The respect had drained out of their voices. Cola felt it, and for the first time, he looked afraid. By evening, Meridian Solutions released an internal memo about workplace conduct and ongoing review, carefully worded but clearly triggered by Cola's behavior. The CEO scheduled an external audit of the partnership process, partly to appease investors and partly to protect the company from scandal. Cola's promised influence suddenly looked like liability, and powerful people hated liability more than they loved ego. Tiniola went home tired, not triumphant, and Adebayo asked her one question. "Do you feel safe?" She paused, then nodded slowly. "Safer," she admitted. Adebayo didn't smile like a man who had won. He simply nodded like a man who had done what was necessary. Tiniola sat in the quiet of her living room and realized something life-changing. Cola's power had always depended on people's silence. The moment the room stopped worshiping him, he became just a man with a loud mouth and a weak foundation. And now that foundation was cracking. Cola did not plead immediately. At first, he tried dignity, the kind that borrowed confidence from tailored suits and practiced smiles. He requested a private conversation through intermediaries, framing it as a clarification meeting, as if what had happened was a misunderstanding between professionals. When that failed, he sent a message directly to Tiniola, carefully worded, falsely gentle, asking to talk like adults, and reminding her of their shared history, as though history was a currency he could still spend. Tiniola read the message once and did not reply. Silence had become her language of control. 2 days later, Cola appeared at the office unannounced, his confidence visibly cracked. He waited near the parking lot like someone who had run out of respectable entrances. When Tiniola arrived, he stepped forward quickly, calling her name with urgency that stripped the power from it. People slowed down, pretending not to watch. This was no longer a king at work. This was a man scrambling to keep his crown from slipping. When Cola finally spoke, the plea spilled out unevenly. He apologized, but not cleanly. His words tangled excuses with regret, pressure, ambition, misunderstanding, stress. He said he never meant to hurt her, never intended things to escalate. He blamed the office culture, the expectations, even her silence, as if her refusal to break down had provoked him. "You know how this industry is," he said quickly. "I was just being firm." Then his voice dropped and desperation crept in. He asked her to talk to her husband, to soften things, to help him salvage the partnership. He reminded her of the years they spent together, the plans they once made, as if nostalgia could overwrite recent cruelty. Tiniola listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. She did not flinch, did not raise her voice, did not step back. When he finished, she said only one sentence: "You didn't treat me like a colleague, and you didn't treat me like a human." Cola's composure collapsed after that. He asked again, this time openly, for help. He admitted the consequences were spreading faster than he expected. Boards were hesitating. Calls were going unanswered. The confidence drained from his posture, replaced by fear. Tiniola watched him carefully, not with triumph, but with clarity. This was not repentance, it was panic. She told him she would not interfere. "What's happening now," she said calmly, "is bigger than me." Cola stared at her like she had spoken a foreign language. He had always believed she existed inside his orbit. He was only beginning to understand that she had moved far beyond it. The meeting Cola finally secured was not the one he wanted. It wasn't held in a private lounge or a discreet office. It took place in a formal boardroom with neutral faces and closed laptops. Adebayo was present, calm and controlled, seated beside legal counsel. The CEO attended briefly, then excused himself, signaling that this was no longer a partnership discussion, but a liability assessment. Cola entered with visible effort, smoothing his jacket, forcing a smile that no one returned. When he spoke, his voice was careful, respectful in a way that revealed fear rather than professionalism. He apologized again, this time directly to Adebayo, insisting his actions were misinterpreted, that he had high standards and a direct style. Adebayo listened without expression. He did not interrupt, correct, or debate. He waited until Cola finished, then spoke quietly. "This conversation changes nothing." The words landed heavily because they were final. Adebayo explained calmly and precisely that the decision to withdraw had already been executed, contracts reviewed, and future direction set. There would be no reconsideration, no mediation, no private resolution. He clarified that consequences were not punishment. They were outcomes of conduct. Kola tried again, this time abandoning professional language. He spoke about reputation, about forgiveness, about how quickly things were falling apart. His voice broke when he said, "You don't understand what this will cost me." Adebayo met his eyes steadily. "I understand exactly," he replied. "That's why this is ending." He gestured gently toward the door, not aggressively, not dramatically. The message was clear. The meeting was over. Security appeared, not forceful, just present, and waited. As Kola was escorted out, the final humiliation was not the removal itself, but the silence. No arguments. No raised voices. No audience. The power he once wielded through public embarrassment had no place here. Outside, phones buzzed with updates he could not control. Within days, official notices followed, partnerships dissolved, advisory roles suspended, invitations withdrawn. The professional world moved on with brutal efficiency. Tiniola did not watch this unfold closely. She focused on her work, her breathing, her peace. When she got home that evening, Adebayo asked, "Are you okay?" She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yes," she said truthfully. Kola had been dismissed, not just from her room, but from her life entirely. The collapse did not arrive with drama. It arrived with emails, calendar cancellations, and silence where praise once lived. Within a week of Kola's dismissal, stories began to surface, not rumors whispered by enemies, but accounts spoken by people who had been waiting for a crack in the wall. A former assistant reached out to compliance officers, detailing years of verbal intimidation disguised as mentorship. A junior analyst submitted a formal complaint about being publicly humiliated during reviews, complete with saved messages and meeting notes. Another colleague described how Kola routinely took credit for team efforts while threatening careers behind closed doors. These were not emotional outbursts. They were structured allegations, documented carefully by people who had learned the cost of speaking too early. Once the first account was acknowledged, others followed. Patterns emerged. Language repeated itself. The same phrases Kola used on Tiniola appeared in testimonies from different companies, different years, different victims. What had once looked like a strong leadership style now read like abuse of authority. Professional bodies took notice. Internal reviews turned into external audits. Recruitment firms quietly removed Kola's profile from preferred candidates lists. Boardrooms that once welcomed him now requested distance, citing reputational risk. Every organization wanted the same thing, proof that they had not enabled him. The allegations grew heavier as investigators uncovered financial irregularities, nothing dramatic enough for headlines, but enough to suggest manipulation of contracts and favoritism. Kola's name, once an asset, became a liability. Emails went unanswered. Calls were politely declined. Even former allies kept conversations brief, afraid that association alone could stain them. The power he once wielded through fear had evaporated, leaving him exposed to the same systems he believed he controlled. Tiniola learned about the allegations indirectly, through HR updates and cautious conversations that avoided her eyes. She did not contribute to them, nor did she deny her own experience when asked. She simply confirmed facts, dates, meetings, words, nothing more. There was no satisfaction in watching the process unfold, only a quiet certainty that truth, when documented properly, did not need revenge to be effective. For the first time, the narrative was no longer shaped by Kola's voice. It belonged to the record. Kola spent months trying to outrun his reputation, but it followed him with the patience of ink. He applied for advisory roles, executive positions, consulting contracts, sometimes under slightly altered titles, sometimes through intermediaries who promised discretion. Each time, the process stalled at the same stage. Initial interest, polite interviews, then silence. When responses came, they were cautious and final. We've decided to pursue other candidates. The board has concerns. This isn't the right fit at this time. No one accused him directly. No one argued. They simply closed doors quietly, the way institutions do when risk outweighs benefit. Even international firms hesitated. Allegations traveled faster than passports. Background checks revealed patterns no resume could hide. Former colleagues stopped answering his calls. People he once corrected publicly now avoided being seen with him. Networking events felt hostile, not because anyone confronted him, but because conversations ended quickly. He tried defending himself online, posting vague statements about false narratives and toxic work cultures, but the effort backfired. Silence would have served him better. Recruiters flagged his profile. Legal counsel advised him to lie low. The man who thrived on attention was told invisibility was his only option. For the first time in his career, Kola experienced irrelevance, not temporary, not strategic, but complete. The industry had moved on without ceremony. Meanwhile, Tiniola's life stabilized in a way she hadn't anticipated. Meridian Solutions restructured. New policies were introduced. She was asked to contribute to process improvements, not because she was someone's wife, but because her documentation had proven invaluable. Colleagues treated her differently, not with fear, but with respect sharpened by hindsight. When a new opportunity came from another firm, better role, better culture, she considered it calmly and accepted. She did not announce her departure loudly. She thanked her team, packed her desk, and walked out with her head high. She did not need the office to remember her suffering. She needed her future to recognize her worth. Months later, life settled into a rhythm that felt earned. Tiniola's new role challenged her without diminishing her. Meetings were professional. Feedback was constructive. Her voice was heard without being tested for weakness. At home, peace returned fully, not the fragile kind that waits for interruption, but the steady kind built on respect. Adebayo never brought up Kola unless Tiniola did, and she rarely did. The past no longer demanded explanation. One evening, while scrolling through muted television channels, Tiniola caught sight of a business segment mentioning industry accountability and leadership consequences. Kola's name appeared briefly at the bottom of the screen, not as a subject, but as a reference. She watched for a moment, then changed the channel. Closure did not require attention. Kola, on the other hand, learned too late what power without character eventually becomes. He watched former peers advance while he recalculated excuses. He replayed moments in his head, the meetings, the jokes, the smirks, searching for where it all went wrong. He realized painfully that humiliating others had never made him strong. It had only delayed his exposure. The systems he once manipulated had simply waited until evidence outweighed influence. There was no dramatic punishment, no public shaming worthy of gossip. There was only absence. And absence, for a man like Kola, was unbearable. Tiniola's victory was not loud. It did not trend. It did not require applause. It lived in the way she walked into rooms without shrinking, in the way her work spoke before she did, in the way her marriage felt like partnership rather than refuge. She did not destroy Kola. She survived him and then moved beyond him. And in the end, that was the consequence he never planned for, a woman he could no longer reach, control, or define, living well without needing him to fall further. Please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.